Hello and welcome to Cooperative Learning Theory. We're going to take a look at an investigation of human learning and how cooperative learning creates social interdependence. My name is Jason Pugh. I'm with the Instructional Management and Leadership Doctoral Program with Robert Morris University. We're going to take a closer look at this today. So some measurable learning objectives to consider are, number one, I'd like for you to be able to identify the five major learning components. Cooperative learning comes up to an acronym that we're going to explore in great detail, and hopefully we see the greater sense of what it accomplishes. Number two, I'd like for you to be able to recall the major theorists of cooperative learning theory, where they came from, what were their notable ideas, and how it's beneficial to where we are at today. Then finally, the third objective is I'd like for you to be able to describe some best practices and procedures when implementing cooperative learning in future settings. So what is cooperative learning? Well, first, it's the instructional strategy that organizes groups. Basically, it's creating teams that work towards a common goal. It establishes the individual and it establishes a part of a whole. And this is where the first learning objective came in, where we talked about the five learning components that it promotes. And this is where I call it PIPIG. I think we'll be able to remember PIPIG. And number one, it promotes positive interdependence. We're able to look and see that people can positively work together in an environment. What we also learn is that it's individual accountability. People are held to their own standards to accomplish their part of the task. Promotive interaction. If we're trying to make sure we're preparing students for the future, we need to make sure that they can interact properly with other students, especially if they don't quite agree with something, which in turn leads to an improvement of social skills. After all, what is learning? Is learning just a material, learning content material, or is it something greater than that? Do we learn to be better human beings in the process? Lastly, the G is group processing. How does the 1 plus 1 create something better in the long run? So, and I want you to take a moment and think if there's any others that you can sort of process. Is there any other, major accomplishments that cooperative learning can project to you? On the sheet that was provided for you, I'd like for you to be able to write down one or two more along with these five major learning components. So, breaking the mold. Who started sort of the idea of cooperative learning theory? Well, first we had John Dewey. John Dewey is the father of American education. He's really also the father of public education, making education relevant to the public and how we interact with each other. And it comes down to social learning. Not just that we learn from a book or that we learn from the professor, but we learn from each other. That's a huge aspect in learning. And it relates to that students just aren't sitting there listening to how you are to me now, but more or less that if you're working with somebody on this, you could be able to take an active role in your learning. Also, it bred into the 1970s with Johnson & Johnson, and yes, that is a family company. Roger and David Johnson, they were the nation's leading researchers on cooperative learning. They are the ones that created PIPIG. They're the ones that developed these based off of 40 years worth of research. They've conducted over 80 studies on how cooperative learning has been an effective model for students to be able to learn off of each other. So they are the ones that were the innovators on this. So for learning objective 2, hopefully we remember that John Dewey was sort of the foundation of this learning theory, and then Johnson & Johnson really propelled it to where it is today. So how does this apply to humanism? Well, first, it promotes all of the following. Number one, active learning. Once again, there's no passive learning. It's not just sitting here and listening to a lecture. It's taking action in what you're trying to accomplish. Also, we talked about social skills, being able to interact with another human being and learning those skills of what to say or even what not to say, when to listen versus when not to listen. You find those gaps are filled in with this. Interconnectivity. It creates a better understanding of the other perspective. You create this sort of web of connections that learn from people that you normally wouldn't learn from. which leads to a better understanding of mankind. When we're taking a look at it, we want to understand not just what we're learning, but how we're learning. And it really creates a good sense of metacognition, which sort of takes a reflective approach on how we learn. And when we're able to understand how we learn and we're able to understand how others seem to learn, we sort of build that connection, which creates a better understanding for mankind. Teamwork. Cooperative learning, you have to work together. Teamwork is a critical element. It allows for not only the individual to shine, but for the entire group to shine together. Synergy. It's the idea that 1 plus 1 is greater than 2, which I know sounds crazy in math class, but don't tell those math teachers that. It really creates a 1 plus 1 is 3, because you're able to take one idea, take another idea, and from there, not only do you just take two ideas, but you're able to work together to create something even better. So that's synergy. So, for the third learning objective, I wanted to take a look at what methods and procedures really apply. What can teachers and future teachers take into this process? If we're taking a look at this from a cooperative learning standpoint, what we want to do to start is to form teams of 3 to 5 people. Preferably 4 is where you would like to be. Most cases that doesn't work. You normally don't have classes of 24. In a perfect world, that'd be amazing, but it doesn't quite work that way. So sometimes you might want to consider having a group of 3 if the ability is quite strong, or a group of 5 if maybe the ability needs a little extra push. Systematically assign teams on ability. This is critical because you don't want to have 4 at-risk students trying to create a project if they might not have the ability to accomplish the task in the first place. So we want to take a look and systematically assign these teams. Do we have somebody strong, a couple people in the middle? Do we have somebody that maybe can shine because now they understand the process associated with who they're working with? So it's kind of everybody gets the lift up out of this. Once again, don't isolate the students considered at risk. Also, we're letting students choose groups because it may cause a lack of work to be done. So this is the problem, and this is actually some thoughts. I'd like for you to think about this, and if you could, on that lesson plan that was provided to you, I'd like for you to write your own idea and really think about how does this accomplish? What are we really getting out of this? If we let students choose their groups, what are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? Or if this teacher assigns them, what are those advantages and disadvantages? I'd like for you to be able to take a few moments and write a couple of those down. Hopefully we came up with some things, and when you turn this back into me, I'd like to be able to see, what ideas were coming through your mind in the process. Also, you have to use problem-based learning. It's a critical element to be able to bring in problem-based learning. When you're able to teach and you're able to devise plans that allow students to really find what problems exist and how they can sort of work through that, there's a greater sense of accomplishment that comes through those. All members need to have an opportunity to contribute. Cooperative learning is not something to where you put a higher student with a lower student and the higher student does all the work. It's meant to be a system to where maybe some strengths from that student with maybe a lower ability can be able to work and be able to shine in his or her own element. Learning occurs through working with each other. So what are some procedures now that we have the teams established? What are some procedures we want to accomplish during this process? First, choose interesting material. And I know that sounds crazy because I know we're rooted in tradition to say this is most important that they learn these concepts. That's true, but you can find interesting ways to produce those products. For instance, if we're looking at a perspective to where we challenge the ideas of smoking and we turn that into a group project to be able to bring that in there. If we're in a health class and we're trying to focus on the effects of smoking and you have a group project on that, students are relating to that, especially in the secondary and higher ed locations. So choose interesting material that they're going to be able to interact with. Okay, if students are disengaged, they lose what's actually being taught to them. Develop clear directions, goals, and objectives. You have to make sure that the students understand every process of what they're learning, which first comes in saying that directions need to be written. They need to be clear. Don't have them in a full paragraph. I've seen that a lot, and a lot of students will not take the time to read that. But if they're in a bulleted list or even a numbered list, they're able to go through the steps of what needs to be accomplished. What I suggest is have a cover sheet with the directions, and then in the back, so that students understand what their expectations are, have a final sheet with a rubric. That way, they understand fully what they need to accomplish and when they need to accomplish it by. Provide deadlines. This is another suggestion that comes in, because if you're able to say, look, step one of this project needs to be done by this date, students are able to chunk the project and it doesn't seem so overwhelming to accomplish. And include some guiding questions. You could do this verbally as the teacher, coming around and making sure that the students are working together on this properly, or you can be able to have guiding questions on a worksheet that can guide them through some ideas that they're working on. Also, we have to consider potential concerns and issues. And this is a system that I thought of based off of research that could really be beneficial. What happens if you're having a conflict in cooperative learning theory? Well, use MLSF. First, you have to monitor. Unfortunately, for teachers and professors, this is not the time to sit at your desk and just let them look. This is a time for you to maneuver around the room, see what potential issues are coming, sort of using that proximity to really understand what's going on. Next, listen. When there is a potential issue that comes in, don't jump right ahead and start providing solutions. Really listen to what the concerns are, even from both or multiple sides. Really listen to what the issues are. From there, acknowledge the concerns. Make sure that the students feel like they're being heard. Half the battle is that if they feel like the instructor is not listening to them and is not supportive, they're going to be less inclined to want to do the project. But if they feel like they're being heard, they're not going to shy away from it. And then build in some facilitating guiding questions. Make sure you're sort of saying, well, how can we use this in a better light? Okay, if this is our problem and this is a good problem, I understand that. How can we bring this in to our project? How can we sort of work together? Can we find a compromise? Maybe we can collaborate on this way to find a better solution. So propose some questions, propose some solutions. Have them discover it too. So some best practices for assessment after the team gets a grade. We already established, because it is establishing teamwork. But if you just choose the team to have a grade, what happens if somebody doesn't do their part? Well, then we have a major problem. There could be a lot of animosity that stems from that. So we have to make sure that we also assess the performance of each team member. Every person has to be responsible for their own part. So what I suggest is have a peer evaluation. Have an accountability sheet to where students do self-reflection and really go through and say, well, what did I do on this that was beneficial? So you have to have both of those elements in that rubric. What I would suggest from there is to adjust the average separately. So that way you say, you know what, this was the team, this was the individual, this is what we gathered out of this. This will not only assume that the team is working together, but this will also assure that individual accountability is occurring in these structures. Students have to make sure they're accomplishing this. Plus, there's something that they get out of, you know what, I don't want to let this team down. So hopefully, I'd like for you to take some time, and if you have any questions, I'd like for you to be able to write them on that lesson plan and make sure you bring them for the next class that we're covering. In the meantime, enjoy, and I'll see you next week.